What if Mount Fuji erupted today, with the full force it is capable of producing?
What would happen to Tokyo, to the cities around the volcano, to Japan itself? Today, we're going to run a simulation based on scientific data to answer exactly that question. We'll explore the real risks behind a Mount Fuji eruption, the dangers, the scale of destruction, and how far it could go on the volcanic explosivity index. Stay with us, because the real question is simple. Would this be just a disaster, or could it change Japan as we know it? To understand what could happen, scientists use a measure called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or simply VEI. This scale measures the intensity of an eruption, mainly the amount of material blasted into the atmosphere and the reach of its impacts. The higher the number, the larger the eruption. In this video, we'll follow a simulation that begins with the first signs of activity at Fuji and moves step by step toward the most extreme scenario this volcano is capable of producing.
But there is an important limit. Based on what scientists know about Mount Fuji, it's not the kind of volcano that produces the very largest eruptions on the Volcanic Explosivity Index.
Its structure and magma system do not show the characteristics typically associated with super eruptions. The most powerful scenario considered realistic for Fuji would be around VEI 5, a very large explosive eruption capable of ejecting vast amounts of ash into the atmosphere and affecting regions far beyond the volcano itself. That is the upper limit we will explore in this simulation. And even at that level, the consequences could be enormous. It is an absolutely normal day in Tokyo. Streets are crowded, trains run on schedule, offices operate in mechanical silence, cafes open their doors, children walk to school. The city functions as it always has. Inside an unremarkable building, sensors begin to register small variations, microtremors, changes in gas release, numerical series drifting slightly away from historical patterns. Nothing violent, nothing abrupt, but enough to indicate that something has changed. At the Japan Meteorological Agency, the data stops being statistical noise. It becomes diagnosis. A technical alert is prepared. There is no emotional language, only objective parameters being exceeded. Minutes later, mobile phones vibrate almost simultaneously. The emergency alert arrives via J-Alert, the national satellite-based transmission system. The message is short, technical, and impersonal. It is not a request. It is an instruction. On the horizon, Mount Fuji begins to release a thin column of ash and volcanic gases. It is not tall, it is not dense, but it was not there before. Small explosions occur along the slopes, not only at the summit. Subtle fissures open at points on the flanks. Ash falls remain confined to the immediate region of the volcano. Lava flows appear in localized areas, short and slow, advancing only a few meters before cooling. What happens is limited, the impact as well. Communities very close to the volcano are evacuated as a precaution. Local roads are closed. Regional traffic temporarily collapses. Helicopters circle overhead. The press refers to it as light activity. There is no national impact. There is no broad economic disruption. Japan continues to function. For the country, this is an inconvenience. For Mount Fuji, merely a warning. The activity does not subside. It evolves. The eruptive column grows rapidly, reaching between 10 and 15 kilometers in height. The sky begins to lose its blue. Grey tones start to dominate the horizon. Now, the wind expands the reach of the event. Fine ash moves beyond the volcanic area, and reaches medium-sized cities such as Fuji-Yoshida, Gotemba, and Fujinomiya. Rooftops become coated. Windshields lose transparency. Cleaning becomes constant and insufficient. What changes is the scale. Aviation reacts first. Airports suspend operations. Flights are cancelled in sequence, not due to panic, but due to technical risk. Volcanic ash is pulverized rock and microscopic glass, too abrasive for turbine engines. On the railways, the impact is immediate. Millimeters of ash on tracks and signaling sensors are enough to shut down entire lines. Stations close in a cascading pattern. Passengers are stranded on platforms. High-speed trains stop as a precaution to avoid loss of traction and derailment. Fine ash begins to reach the Tokyo metropolitan region. It does not yet paralyze the city, but it degrades air quality. Masks reappear. Environmental sensors trigger continuous alerts. In rural areas, the effect is clear. Crops are covered by ash. Leaves suffer chemical damage. Farmers understand that part of the harvest has been lost even before any official announcement. There is still no collapse. But now there is cost. Now Japan begins to pay attention. The sky darkens in the middle of the day. It is not night. It is not a storm. It is ash. Before Tokyo comes to a complete halt, the cities at the base of Fuji enter functional collapse. Narusawa, Fujikawa-Guchiko, and once again Fuji-Yoshida begin living under continuous fallout of wet ash. It is not light. It is heavy. Roofs creak under constant accumulation. Single-story houses give way first. Traditional wooden structures cannot withstand the prolonged load. The dull sound of collapses spreads across entire neighborhoods. More than 600,000 people within an approximate radius of 25 kilometers face the same silent threat. Weight that cannot be removed in time. Regional highways disappear beneath the ash. Supply trucks become stranded. Fuel stations close. Hospitals operate on limited power as generators are activated. In the capital, the impact arrives shortly after. Tokyo darkens for hours. In some areas, for days. Visibility drops sharply. Buildings lose their outlines. Lights remain on during daylight hours. Transportation collapses. Trains stop. Highways lock up. Airports close completely. The ash, mixed with moisture, becomes conductive. Electrical insulators begin to fail. The impact reaches another basic service. Ash accumulates in open reservoirs and drains into intake systems. Filters at treatment plants begin to clog. Pressure drops. Taps fail. Water supply is rationed in the most affected areas. Inside the office of the Prime Minister of Japan, maps zoom in on these specific cities. Blocked routes, deactivated logistics hubs, energy and supply charts enter the critical zone. The pre-mobilization order is issued. The Japan's self-defense forces begin to move, not to control the volcano, but because civilian capacity has already been exceeded. Mount Fuji continues expelling ash with no change in rhythm. Indifferent to the immobilized cities, it has done this before. The difference is that now, there are 35 million people in its path, and it has not yet reached its limit. Here, the tone changes. The eruption reaches the most extreme plausible scenario for Mount Fuji. The eruptive column rises beyond 25 kilometers in height. Ash spreads across much of Honshu, but the greatest danger does not come from the sky. Part of the column cannot sustain itself. It collapses. Pyroclastic flows form on the slopes. Dense clouds of superheated gases and rock fragments, advancing at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. Based on historical deposits and conservative modeling, these flows tend to remain within 5 to 10 kilometers of the cone. In larger collapses, channeled by valleys, they can reach up to 15 kilometers. For those who live in these areas, distance is not geographic, it is temporal. In Narusawa and Fujikawa-Guchiko, evacuation time is over. There are no more windows, only seconds. Where the flow passes, the air becomes unbreathable. Forests ignite instantly. The Aokigahara region catches fire before any visible lava arrives. Cities outside the direct reach of the flow, such as Susono and Fuji, are not struck by the pyroclastic core, but suffer from radiant heat, secondary fires, massive ashfall, and volcanic mud flows descending rivers and valleys. Now, helicopters and convoys of the self-defense forces advance to the thermal risk boundary. They attempt to extract the last survivors while the entire horizon is in flames. At the same time, far away, Tokyo goes dark. The most illuminated city in the world is plunged into darkness, not by explosion, but by the accumulation of millimeters of wet ash on a highly sensitive electrical infrastructure. Ports close, airports remain inoperative, global supply chains are disrupted, Japan enters a national crisis. And still, it must be made clear, Mount Fuji does not destroy Japan. It does not annihilate. It paralyzes. It interrupts the normal functioning of a highly interconnected society and shows that, in the face of certain natural processes, human response capacity has limits. Up to this point, we have seen everything Mount Fuji can do on its own. The physical limits, the plausible scenarios, the worst case the volcano itself can produce. We saw how it paralyzes cities, interrupts systems, and immobilizes an entire country, using only its own energy. But history shows that volcanoes do not always act alone. There are forces that do not appear on the surface, that do not release ash, that leave no visible columns in the sky, forces that act in silence, far below the ground. There is an unpredictable variable, earthquakes, and in the case of Mount Fuji, that variable has been present before. The year is 1707. Japan knows no electricity, no sensors, no satellite alerts. Cities are built of wood. Communication is slow. Life depends on the stability of the land. Then, the ground fails. One of the largest earthquakes in Japan's history strikes the country's center. The shaking is violent and prolonged. Houses collapse. Temples fall. Slopes give way. Along the coast, the sea retreats and returns in destructive waves. Tsunamis hit coastal villages. Ports vanish. Trade routes are severed. Hunger and disease spread in the months that follow. Japan enters social collapse. And above all of this, one mountain remains silent. Mount Fuji does not erupt, not that day, nor the next. Nothing happens. For many, the silence is relief. For others, a sign the worst is past. Days go by, weeks pass. Reconstruction begins slowly. Ruins are cleared. Life reorganizes itself over unstable ground. The earthquake fades into memory. For many, the danger is over. But Mount Fuji remains there, immobile, without visible signs. And that is what makes this pause unsettling. Then, without warning, the mountain responds. There is no long sequence of volcanic tremors, no explosion at the summit. The eruption begins on the flanks. Fissures open along the slopes. Ash and gases rise kilometers into the air, light enough to be carried by the wind. The wind blows toward Edo. The sky darkens. Ash accumulates. Fields are buried. Agriculture collapses. Famine deepens among a population still recovering from the earthquake. The Hōei eruption has begun. Centuries later, science remains cautious. The earthquake did not directly cause the eruption, but it may have been the final trigger. The shaking altered deep stresses, reorganized fractures, opened pathways. If the system was already charged, the push may have been enough, or perhaps not. Science still debates, because in geology, not every trigger leaves clear marks. Sometimes, what we witness is simply the moment when two slow processes intersect, and the silence between them is part of the story.